Since the arrival of comic books, developers have struggled to adapt these fantastical and chaotic works into video games. Most usually fail due to a short deadline, resulting in poorly executed gameplay and a world that's too broken to even be considered playable, while others struggle under the weight of its expectations and ultimately collapse under the pressure. Sure, there have been some games that have turned out to be surprisingly good, but as a whole, video games based on comic books never work out in the long run. Yet that all changed in 2009 when Rocksteady Studios released what many would regard as the greatest comic book game of all time. Until this point, Rocksteady Studios was barely known to the general public, having only one other game credited to them. Yet it would be their take on DC's Dark Knight that would ultimately make them a household name. But now, after 12 years and having experienced the entirety of the Arkham franchise, is the first entry still as good as we remember? Or was this game simply able to fool everyone with its all-star cast and comic book visuals? Let's find out. This is Batman: Arkham Asylum. It's another long night in Gotham City, and once again the Batman has brought down the villainous Joker. Or has he? After stopping an attack on City Hall, Batman personally escorts the Joker to Arkham Asylum, a massive mental institution built on an island which also serves as a well-fortified prison for the criminally insane. It is here that the worst of Batman's rogues gallery resides, and it is the only place in Gotham that has the means to contain someone as destructive as the Joker. However, worried that the Joker might be planning something else tonight, Batman follows him into the asylum, only to realize too late that the Joker isn't the one now trapped on the island. Batman is. The Joker's accomplice Harley Quinn has taken control of security on the island, and within a matter of seconds has given her boss the means to evade capture. Now it's up to Batman and his unseen companion Oracle to track down the Joker and take back control of the island before he unleashes chaos on all of Gotham. It's a storyline that was made for a comic book, and it's clear right from the start that a lot of love and attention has been given to make this narrative flow perfectly. With a clear escalation of events throughout, Batman is forced to contend with a wide variety of different villains before he can take on the Joker. From well-known villains like Bane and Scarecrow to the more obscure yet equally disturbing Victor Zsasz. Every foe is given their time to shine, whether in the form of a boss fight or by simply giving us some fun dialogue.
Hey, scram, bats! This is my me time.
Where's Gordon?
Wouldn't you like to know?
I'm over here.
Shut up!
Ah, you crazy bitch.
Meanwhile, Batman's supporting cast is given as much care as the villains. His relationship with Commissioner Gordon does well to endear us to him in the early game, as does his discussions with the rest of the Arkham staff. While Batman's dynamic with Oracle is clearly that of a partnership that's managed to endure for years, with Oracle serving as a source of levity in contrast to Batman's more serious and professional attitude. They both balance off each other well. Although I won't lie, at first I was annoyed with the fact that Batman had to walk whenever they talked. Granted, I did understand why the developers did this. If the game had allowed us to sprint during these segments, then it's likely we'd miss out on important dialogue. It's quite clear that Rocksteady had put in as much work into the writing as they did into the gameplay, so having us slow down during these brief moments does help alleviate the tension present in the game world before we're forced back into the action. Of course, what I think surprised me the most about Arkham Asylum's story was how dark it got. Not just visually, but tonally, this game seems to have more relation with the horror genre than most action-adventure games. There are many unnerving moments throughout which leave you questioning what's real and what isn't, especially whenever you're facing off against Scarecrow, who is easily Arkham Asylum's most underrated villain. At times you can't help but admire the boldness of the game designers, especially for one particular moment that I won't spoil. These gameplay segments are excellent at highlighting the weaknesses and flaws of our hero, as it becomes more obvious that despite all of Batman's skills, he's still trapped on an island full of people who want nothing more than to break him physically and mentally, which only makes any moments in which he loses his composure even more alarming. It's pretty clear that this is an experienced Batman who's been watching over Gotham for years now. He understands how to turn his enemies' fears against them and can often be as dark as the villains he fights. Yet the game isn't afraid to showcase the humanity behind the character as well. Batman is constantly putting his life on the line to save others, often resulting in him getting injured as evidenced by the natural degradation of his suit as time goes on. I only wish we got to experience more of the detective aspects of Batman in this game. Still, Rocksteady was able to perfectly balance out the terror present in this universe with the heroics, which is no easy feat. This is best demonstrated through the gameplay itself. Arkham Asylum's core gameplay can typically be broken down into three categories: combat, stealth, and exploration. Each of these naturally interconnect, gradually becoming more complex as time goes on, forcing you to adapt and take advantage of every asset at your disposal in order to succeed, especially against many of the late game challenges. Starting with the combat, Batman is a skilled martial artist capable of taking down multiple foes at once. His basic skills consist of punches, counters, stuns, and being able to leap over his enemies. Eventually, he'll be able to utilize his gadgets in combat, which, when timed right, can disarm an armed opponent. He can also use a ground takedown, which, while it does leave you vulnerable to an attack, can instantly take out an enemy, often encouraging you to wager whether it's the right move to make in the midst of combat. Meanwhile, his special combo moves give you the means to eliminate one or more enemies at once, but you'll need to land multiple hits on your opponents without taking any damage before you can use these. It all sounds simple on paper, but gradually the combat becomes more complex as you start dealing with larger groups of enemies, many of which will be bringing guns, knives, and tasers to the fight. Later on, you'll even have to deal with men fueled by venom, a powerful compound that effectively transforms ordinary people into living battering rams. These giant monsters can drastically alter how a fight plays out. Yet even when you're trapped in a room with dozens of men, you never feel as though you're outmatched. This is because Arkham Asylum's combat is set up in such a way that you can always outmaneuver your enemies. This is all thanks to how the free flow combat is implemented. For starters, the game's camera maintains a fixed position above you so you can always see everything around you. This is integral since enemy AI is quite aggressive, even on the easier difficulties. More often they'll attack you one after another, forcing you to always stay alert, waiting for the right moment to counter their strikes. While Batman himself is able to alternate between multiple opponents at once in quick succession, combat as a whole is built around the idea of you constantly moving from one opponent to the next, never slowing down and always attacking, all the while being ready to counter your enemies and deliver a powerful takedown should the opportunity arise. In short, the combat rewards you for maintaining momentum while often punishing you for slowing down. This perfectly fits into Batman's character as an expert martial artist. While he does not have any superpowers, this game showcases time after time that he doesn't need any. It's his adaptability and understanding of his enemies that makes him so terrifying, and there's no better showcase of this than during the Predator sequences. As his name implies, Batman is skilled at using the darkness to his advantage, sneaking up on unsuspecting prey and taking them down before anyone even knows he was there, all the while remaining aware that detection will likely result in his death. Since Batman is quite susceptible to bullets, the game encourages you to stay quiet and think outside the box when approaching a stealth situation. Thankfully, much like combat, you have plenty of stealth-based skills to assist you in this endeavor. Batman's detective mode allows you to see through walls, providing you with the perfect way to keep track of your enemies as you survey your environment from atop a gargoyle. Meanwhile, your explosive gel is effective at creating impromptu traps, since it can be placed anywhere in your environment, while your sonic batarang can lure enemies to an ideal location for you to strike from. Each of these tools gives you a distinct advantage over your heavily armed opposition, who will gradually lose their composure, becoming more desperate and paranoid as they struggle to find you, until eventually the last man standing will be so terrified that he can't help but wonder if Batman is truly human. At its heart, the Predator encounters are all about fear, taking apart a group of enemies who are constantly finding new ways to adapt to your tactics. Whether by setting up explosives on vantage points, taking hostages, or utilizing a collar that triggers a loud noise once a person's heart rate drops. These slight changes to the stealth gameplay can radically alter how you approach a scenario, often resulting in you having to deal with enemies in new ways, especially if you end up revisiting an old location while hunting the Joker, since any changes you've made to the environment will remain in place throughout the rest of your playthrough. Thankfully, since you're constantly being given new gadgets to use, you'll always find yourself with a new way to approach a Predator sequence. Of course, whenever you're not hunting the Joker, you're likely exploring the open world in order to find the collectibles. Taking cues from Metroidvania, Rocksteady gives the player an island to explore with puzzles and collectibles hidden throughout, most of which require specific gadgets in order to solve. There's a wide assortment of these to find, and all of them are cleverly hidden by everyone's favorite dastardly villain, the Riddler. He makes it his mission to prove he's smarter than Batman by seeing if he can find and solve all of his riddles hidden throughout the island. Clearly, he is a genius beyond measure. Still, there is added incentive to find these items aside from capturing the Riddler, whether it be so you can unlock some of the many audio logs about the game's villains, or take a sneak peek behind the scenes of this game's design. But I found the best reason to complete these challenges would be to earn experience points. Usually you can gain experience by defeating enemies, but easily the fastest method to level up in this game would be through the Riddler challenges scattered throughout the asylum, most of which are easy enough, although I won't lie that many of the riddles are quite tricky and can require some thought to piece together. These puzzles do a good job of helping to break up the gameplay and do encourage you to revisit older locations, while those in search of a good mystery can find it here thanks to the Spirit of Arkham questline. Yet all these different challenges have one thing in common: they all contribute to making you stronger. With every level you earn a point which you can then put towards unlocking new skills and upgrades for Batman. These can range from new combat and stealth techniques, to more health and improving the capabilities of your gadgets, like increasing the power of your cryptographic sequencer or allowing you to throw multiple batarangs. Each of these unlocks has a clear purpose in game and naturally builds upon the aspects of Batman's gameplay. Aside from the collectibles, the only other piece of side content available to the player would be the challenge maps. These are essentially a series of combat and stealth-based challenges taking place in set arenas, each of which requiring you to meet certain win conditions in order to earn a perfect score. For the combat ones, these usually involve you taking on hordes of enemies without taking any damage or breaking your combo streak. Also, you can earn the maximum number of points, while the stealth challenges require you to take down enemies in a number of particular ways, like using explosive gel to knock out several goons at once or landing on top of an enemy before taking him out. These challenge maps do a good job of testing your skills and knowledge of the game's mechanics, most of which strike the right balance in difficulty, with only one in particular feeling unfair by design. Furthermore, since the release of the game, the developers have added a number of DLC maps to Arkham Asylum, all of which are included in the Return to Arkham collection. Each of these follow a similar structure to the base game challenges, with only a few proving to be an exception. However, easily the standout of this game's DLC would be giving us the opportunity to play as the Joker, who unlike Batman has a more limited skill set and all of his takedowns are fatal. As such, his challenge maps are far more difficult by design, but I think it's worth it just to have the chance to play as a psychotic clown, even in these secluded arenas. Of course, if you were to compare the gameplay of Arkham Asylum as a whole to later entries in the series, the original is quite simplistic. Still, Arkham Asylum serves as a solid foundation for what would come next in this franchise, paving the way for some of the best stories DC Comics has ever told, and allowing gamers everywhere to experience some truly awe-inspiring music. Composed by Ron Fish and Nick Arundel, Arkham Asylum's music is the right blend of haunting and valorous. Utilizing a mixture of deep and impactful instruments gives the entire soundtrack a more foreboding feel to it. Even during some of the game's more epic and heroic moments, the soundtrack will often quiet down to reflect the sense of unease present in the asylum. Whether lives are on the line or not, the music is constantly giving you a feeling of dread throughout, subtly making it clear to the player that the Batman's nightmare has only just begun. And it wouldn't be until the final act of the game that the music begins taking on a more hopeful tune. Meanwhile, the developers have made good usage of sound to help players throughout the game, usually by having the enemies call out whenever they see you or have them making loud noises as they're preparing to fire their weapons. These simple vocal indicators do a good job of keeping the player alert of what's around them, especially if they're focused on beating down another enemy at the time. Knowing that an opponent has access to these powerful weapons and is getting ready to use them can often be a lifesaver, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Rocksteady has managed to maintain a perfect balance of horror and boisterous noises throughout Arkham Asylum, from the cartoony wail created whenever you knocked someone down to the recognizable ring emitted from the loudspeakers throughout Arkham's PA system, or even the loud screams created by the more mentally deranged. These sounds effectively resonate with the player, often serving to remind you that you're still playing a superhero game, even amidst all the carnage created by Batman's rogues gallery. It's the same case when you consider Arkham Asylum itself. This is an ancient institution where madness lies in wait, desperate to be set loose on the world without a care or thought. As such, from a visual standpoint, this island needed to radiate both history and terror, while at the same time giving many of its areas a more modern and clean look to them to help appeal to its better nature. Rocksteady accomplished this by using Unreal Engine 3. This enabled them to control the lighting and tones present in the game world with ease, a major factor since the game is set entirely at night. Therefore, it's integral that the player is able to not only see their surroundings, but also have their perspective limited or twisted whenever the situation arose, which would naturally add to the player's sense of unease throughout the game. Meanwhile, the character models are a nice blend of realistic and comic book visuals. All the characters in game look as though they were drawn as a cartoon first before they were rendered in 3D. This gives all the residents of Arkham a distinct look, without making them appear too outlandish or be considered unnatural. By comparison, the remaster has updated its graphics with Unreal Engine 4. This has had mixed results for the game as a whole. While that original dark and encroaching atmosphere is still present, at times it's muddled by the brighter color palette. This is most noticeable in some of the character models. Some have clearly benefited from the update, while others look as though their new textures have just been slapped onto them. Don't get me wrong, it's still a good looking game, but it's clear that they needed to put in a bit of extra work on the remaster's graphics. Revisiting Arkham Asylum after all these years is rather bizarre. Considering where the series ends up, it's easy to forget how straightforward the first game was in terms of gameplay. Yet despite this, the combat is still as refined as ever. The atmosphere is palpable, and the entire game just reeks of classic DC comics. This is a Batman in his prime, facing off against his greatest foe in a story that simply radiates the love Rocksteady has for this genre. It is without a doubt a good superhero game, and I'm quite confident that we wouldn't have so many excellent games based on comic books if it wasn't for Arkham Asylum. It really set the benchmark of what comic books could do in this medium and serves as a nice basis for what would come next for Rocksteady. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I'm the Grave Tender, and thank you for joining me on the other side. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you all have a nice day.